as a product leader, I always want the vision to be 2 years sooner. I always want to see that scaled impact as fast as possible. But I don't think that's really a criticism of our people and our ecosystem, and more of the humbling experience that it is when you start digging into a big, hairy problem, how much more complex it always looks than on the surface. It's very easy to go talk about a super app vision. It's really hard to build an open source framework and community and sustaining businesses that do it.
That was Alex Chiocchi, Chief Product Officer at Pagoda, formerly known as Near Inc. This is a very special episode because Pagoda is the engineering arm of the Near ecosystem responsible for major protocol upgrades, including a lot of the tech stack currently known as the blockchain operating system. This makes it a very special podcast that strikes a really nice balance between Alex's personal journey from an early employee at LinkedIn into Pagoda via Kraken and his own AI startup along the way, the principles of product management, the theory, the mission, the vision, and finally, deeper insights into the state of engineering on the Near protocol, where we're at and where we're going. I really enjoyed this conversation because it is a no-holds-barred, raw, honest exploration packed with alpha and unique insight. It's also an interesting episode because when I announced that I was having Alex on the podcast, there were no shortage of outstanding community members, ranging from Near Foundation and former Pagoda employees, that sent me DMs with community questions. These questions are total fire and we got some incredible insights from them, but I do apologize because Alex had a tight agenda and 2 hours were just not enough. I know that 2 hours sound like a long time, but trust me, it is worth every minute. Without further ado, let's enjoy this conversation with Alex Chiocchi. Bye. Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Wild User Interviews podcast with me, AVB. Today, I've got with me Alex Chiocchi, Chief Product Officer at Pagoda. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me, AV. Pleasure to be here.
Have you been told that your name sounds like Steve Aoki?
I have heard that. So funny story. It's an Italian name, so gnocchi pasta. Many people confuse it for a Japanese name. So there's been times where I've come into meetings or different, and people are like, you look very different than what I expected. And I was like,
really?
That's because they think Steve Aoki, right? Who's amazing DJ, great fun, but different man, different background.
And I'm sure that Steve would be a great fit for a product role in Web3.
Yeah, potentially. You could
And with those headphones, you look like you would be a great fit in the DJ world as well, but different men. It's really curious to me because phonetically, it sounds the same, but I would almost use that as a cue. Like I would use the phonetics as a cue to understand how to spell like the word. Because Aoki, Japanese and Spanish have like very clean vowels. And then there's like a K there, which is pretty straightforward. But Italian, the CH, some people would say sh, or I've seen all sorts of combinations, and I'm sure that you have too over your lifetime.
Oh, for sure. I've gotten like karaoke, Chiocchi.
Chiocchi.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Yeah. But I think it's one of those things where, as you said, Latin languages, that there's a little bit of a difference there versus probably the Anglo side of English, probably where difference is. But yeah, look, it's fun to have a noteworthy last name. People usually, as they get to know me, actually just start calling me by my last name, which is fun.
And I think it's like an interesting last name, but it's like mid-level complexity. Because something that I've noticed with both Ilya and Alex Shevchenko is that in people's mind, they can see all the letters that are in the surname, but they can't quite remember what the actual surname is. So I've seen all sorts of Shevchenko, like I've seen all sorts of like weird surnames that don't actually get to it. I even have to check myself when I have to write their names. What is their actual surname? Like Popashunki, Polin, Polos.
Yeah, no, it's
very
true.
culturally insensitive. I know. I'm sorry.
No. I think if it's not your native tongue, the hack that I use is I usually just say, before I embarrass myself and butcher your name, please tell me how I should say this. And I've personally found, because I basically only speak 1.5 languages, if that generally people appreciate it. So that's where I just work from.
I never do it on purpose, But I do enjoy beginning the podcast with a good laugh at how my honest attempt just falls flat most of the times.
Nailed mine. You nailed mine.
Thank you. I did spend like an hour in the mirror like, Chiocchi, Chiocchi. I'm guessing that your other half is Italian?
My partner or my ethnicity? Sorry.
You said 1.5 languages.
Oh, no. Actually, my half language is not Italian. It's actually Spanish.
Oh,
Because
really?
yeah, so my mom is, or she since passed, but she was Spanish and Costa Rican. And yeah, so living in California, there was like a discussion between, does he learn Italian or does he learn Spanish? Spanish is helpful here. However, I am doing Duolingo for Italian now because every time I go to Italy, somebody goes, "Oh, you're one of us." And I'm like, "Grazie."
Yes.
And they're like,
Yes.
"Oh, no. Oh, please. Oh, you've hurt me."
I'm a bad Italian. I don't really.
I have the name, so I'm learning it now. And it's actually been fun. I was just in Italy for a friend's wedding, thoroughly embarrassed myself. But like many things, people appreciate honest effort. So at least we have a good laugh at, and I can keep moving my way forward.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. I think everyone should be learning like a second or third language just to get like the neurocircuitry going.
Oh, yeah.
Every time that I go to Germany, it's been a while now, but summer of 2017 and 2018, 1 month in Berlin and sometime in Switzerland, in Zurich. And every time I was like, the words are always going to be the same. Like they're really long and weird. But once you learn one, it's always going to be the same. And then you stack one on top. And over time, you can construe basic sentences. I've been using this app called Linkvist. It's a
Oh,
startup from Estonia.
cool.
And they do like the cards model. And what I like about them is that they show you how many words you've learned. But they also tell you like, hey, you need these many words to have like basic proficiency. And it's not that many words. Like, I don't know. I guess I'm a little bit competitive, but I'm like, I can learn 500 words. I can learn basic grammar.
I think it's interesting when you put it that way because there's a really interesting psychology around motivation and quantifying something. I look back to when I took Spanish classes in school, and you spend a year learning maybe 100 words. For most, at least in the States, like our language requirements, our education requirements are not probably as good as Australia and Europe. I actually am pretty confident in that assumption. You spend a year learning 100 words. I think if somebody had told me when I was 13 or 14, like just go learn 100 words, that probably would have been better than just like spoon feeding it to you and not telling you what the goal is. I don't know. Something interesting there.
Yes. There's two things. First, education systems. I think that what probably makes Australia, and I'm assuming some parts of Europe, certainly the UK, different to the US, is that we have standardized testing. So every kid in every high school sits the same test. And then those are the scores used for university. So you actually have interesting benchmarks, and the universities are almost able to like feed down to the schools the standard that you need to get in. I've been listening some things about the US recently, but it does seem like every university has like their own entry pathways, and it's very subjective
Yeah.
for each.
We have standardized testing too. So we have STAR testing and SAT and ACT, STAR for like elementary and then SAT and ACT for high school to university. The problem is that the standards are not consistently enforced across different private versus public institutions. All sorts of loophole rules. And there was like a huge documentary that actually came out recently about essentially like very wealthy people finding ways to make backdoor donations into sports programs to like hack that. So that capitalism does a lot of great things. You may not argue though that in education it has the best incentive alignment there. I don't know.
The All In podcast has a beautiful take on it, and I personally like it because they're all billionaires, maybe except Jason. But they're honest. You're like, hey, if you want to pay to get your kid into school, that's fine. Let's just acknowledge they're not as smart. They're going to pay more, and then they'll be subsidizing other smart people. And because that's the issue, right? It's the fairness of it. If you only have 50 places, don't let them all be taken up by people that are either paying or getting into sports. Maybe have 50 places for people that are actually merit based, and then 50 for the rest. You pay, you play sports, and you are someone's son.
So
But anyway.
I have a bias, but the University of California public system essentially runs on that system. There's a guaranteed spot for standardized test high scorers are in the top 10% in the state in some UC research institution, guaranteed spot. The problem is that they don't always get the best school spots. So like Cal Berkeley, UCLA are often like the top rated ones, and they don't always get those spots. So like, it's just this forever issue. Education, if I was being completely open and honest, like long-term in my life, that would be something I'd like to be able to like spend more time working on. I think if you look at what can have an outsized impact on the world over many generations, it is education.
Wait, not near? What? What do you say?
Near can too, right? And maybe it's education powered by Near. Maybe that's the magic bullet. But I just think it's like a fascinating topic. It's unfortunately, it's like a privilege though in the US to be able to help education, like to work in an education nonprofit. Like you already have to have been like crazy successful. It's weird.
Interesting. It's all part of the same stack. When you try to talk to someone about Web3 and the problems in the world, and this is how we code, and this is how we do product, if they don't have a good basis for education, most things are going to go over their head. That's why we're living in such interesting times where we've got the ability to go straight to people. So you bypass any, what do you call it? Any blockers in the past. You can build your audience, you can talk to people. But now what we're finding is that there are challenges in scaling that because the general population have not been exposed to a lot of this information in the past. By the way, in some ways, not you directly, but the boss as a whole have inspired me.
I love that.
Smooth, always smooth. Sometimes when I'm editing, I'm like, that was, I really did a 180 there.
No, I like it. I really did like
it. Yeah, the boss inspired me to start learning how to code again.
Oh.
So I started learning Python in 2018. No, around there, with a book called Automate the Boring Things. And it was a book deliberately aimed at office people. And I was coming out of the law, and I was like, I hate this, but maybe I can do some in between, like my professional education and technology. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. And fast forward to today, the issue that I have is with the LLMs, ChatGPT, I've been talking to Claude a lot from Anthropic. I was in a really weird spot where I'm like, do I really need to learn how to code, or can I just get the LLM to do all the code for me?
Yeah.
And I'm open to hear other people's point of view. Maybe there's a way to hack this, but my take on it is you need to know the basics. I've given the thing like 20 ideas for applications. It gives me code back, and I have no idea what it is. So I've signed up for a free code camp. And I'm really happy that the curriculum takes you like really back to the basics. Like I felt a little bit stupid at the beginning, starting like HTML and CSS. Sure. But I've had a blast. Baby steps, split screen. I can see what I do on the left and then it changes on the right. And I also like it that those 3 initial modules, so there's like HTML, CSS, like responsive, so there's some React in there, and then it moves into JavaScript. I think that those 3 would probably be enough to enable me to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And to be able to like inspect components, fork them, compose them.
That's awesome. Wow. What a journey. That really warms my heart actually to hear that it's been inspiring for you to rekindle something you're interested in and might be something that helps you build something you're passionate about. At the end of the day, like that's why I'm here, as opposed to some other corporate job or other opportunities to work in investing or something like that. Like what I love about product, and I think what keeps me coming back as a product leader, no matter what the problem is, it's those stories. It's being able to see the impact on how what you build enables someone to enjoy something new. Hopefully that provides a real utility. I would say like the boss is in an interesting place. It's very new. Like the existing developer experience that's there is like a great start for showcasing what I call the art of the possible, but it still needs quite a bit of work for it to be like a full forced application engine.
That's going to be the title of the podcast.
The art of the possible.
The art of the possible. Yeah, I like it.
That is, I mean, that's my, man, there's so much to say about that. That's my personal feelings about what makes a great product is it enables people to see the art of the possible. And now, what enabling somebody means meeting them where they're at. So meeting a developer and how they want to see things versus, an average Web 2 user, somebody who's used to using Facebook or a banking app, or versus a giant enterprise. You have to meet them where they are and enable them. And if you could speak to what matters to them through your product, then you achieve that moment.
Do you find, because I did crowdsource some questions from some
Good.
people that I know that are building on Boss, former Pagoda employees,
Yeah.
former Foundation employees that did product on some related projects. And I'll leave those for the end, but one thing that has
Oh, you
always
have
been
me
clear
curious so much. I'd love to hear community.
one thing that was clear to me is there's always tension between product and engineering.
Yeah.
So as you say, meet people where they are. I'm wondering what your experience has been between what some people may call these like empty words or whatever. Product people make the big money by just like saying all these design thinking, and you can just copy
Sure.
paste the framework and put
The
words
art of
in
the
there.
possible. Pay me.
The art of the possible. It's just clickbait. You get a podcast download, but not a fucking product. Like, what are we doing here?
No,
So I'm
it's a fair
wondering,
question.
how have you seen that gap? And especially when we look at Web3 and Near specifically, I know that from some of the talks that you've done in the past, you saw that opportunity to bridge that gap between what could be possible with Web3 and the Near tech stack. So yeah, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I guess like I would speak to it on two ways. Like one more tactically today, to your question about like meeting developers where they are and like what the gap is. And then long term, where is the vision going? And at the end of the day, like you have to address both at the same time. That's what's really hard about product is like you have to keep iterating towards what people are using today and making it better, but it needs to be leading towards a vision that has meaningful value for an audience. And this is sometimes a bad word in Web3, but it has a sustainable competitive advantage. And like, I think I'm a philosophy major by education. Like I love to think about the 100-year problem, but you can't make a 100-year impact if you can't survive. And so again, bringing this question back to the two things, it's what is the gap today and what is the future possibility of where we could get to a really exciting, sustaining ecosystem? Today, I think the biggest issue with Boss and the component framework really comes down to the JavaScript VM itself is got some restrictions within it that on the surface looks like, why are you making me stay to very narrow hold? And why can't I bring in like my own libraries? Why can't I make this work exactly how I want to see it in the architecture for my application? And it's frustrating for people right now. And there's an intentional reason why that is. And we are like actively working on an improvement, should be ready within a month or two, to help people get the best of both worlds. So let's start with the intention. The intention is that really to build trustless front-end components that work on a decentralized stack. Why does that matter? When you go to a website today, and I go to, let's say, uniswap.com, right, or app.uniswap, I have to bookmark that app to remember that this isn't the fraud version. There's a human trust that's associated with the front end of what you're working with that isn't one that's like scraping my wallet or putting me into a protocol that's just going to drain my account. And we actually, for as much as we say we have DApps, like it's operating on human trust as to who published that application. When really everything else that's happening in crypto, whether it's the storage, the money itself, or the smart contracts that are automating back-end trust, are all working off of a trustless system. And yet the place where everybody's spending their time still requires a guess and check of trust.
I really like the way that you laid out the evolution of like Web3. There's like Bitcoin, we've got a ledger, then there's Ethereum.
Yeah.
I guess like smart computing. But we've always been missing that last mile of how do people interact with it. It, to me, the equivalent, and I'm really good at coming up with weird analogies, is like saying, hey, we've got an island. It's going to be perfect, paradise. You can make money, great weather, kangaroos.
Own your own data, master of your own environment.
master of magic and the art and everything in the middle. But to get there, you need to catch my private jet. And I decide when to fly it, who I fly, how much it costs, and fuck you if you don't like it. That's not really a paradise island if there's that, yeah, I was blocker in the middle, middleman, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
The layer that I usually come in with, it's like the user experience.
Uh-huh.
For me, Web3 has not been usable. I had never really given much thought to, yeah, it may or may not be usable, but the actual ownership of the structure of that layer also matters. So yeah, it's been fascinating. I'm very excited to have you on because I first came across you on a Banyan Collective video on YouTube talking about super apps.
I saw the Twitter post. I saw your post.
Oh, you saw it back in the day, yeah?
I saw the one you just posted about the hint as to who's going to speak.
Oh, yeah. I've been like munching bits here and there, but I've learned to take my time to judge people.
Okay.
Because few people have vision, but even fewer people have execution. So back in the day, I really liked the super apps vision. And I don't know, when did you join Pagoda?
It's been almost a year now. Oh, sorry,
Okay.
Pagoda. Sorry, I joined the ecosystem. It's been 9 months Pagoda, but about a year for the ecosystem. I was a floating consultant for a little while. Yeah.
Okay. In mid 2021 to late 2021, the first iteration of the Guilds program from the Neo Foundation, I started the Silicon Craftsman, the product and user experience guild. And it was interesting because I could see that we had all the raw materials for creating really good user experiences. I just like the technical ability to do it myself. And it may have been a little bit early to bring in those product and designers because we were like, yeah, we can build it. And they were like, yeah, cool. Who do we talk to or how? I think that was probably the stage where the developers were putting all the primitives in. And you can definitely see the evolution with what Boss is now. But yeah, that vision about the super apps, I find really interesting. And
we're still working towards it.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Because then I saw the evolution of the presentation at ETH Denver, alpha.near.org get released. Then I saw you at Consensus. And yeah, how are you tracking? Are you happy with progress?
I mean, I am, it's so many thoughts that come to that when you ask that. Like, I am really proud of the team and the ecosystem to pull off multiple big product experiments on new tech stack, new user experience is like an insane feat. And I've worked at a lot of great companies, and the quality of the people here, not just technical execution, but the desire to build great things and work towards it is amazing. And I know it's frustrating sometimes because open source ecosystems are a little chaotic, but I can say I worked at some like very big companies that are noteworthy Silicon Valley companies, and like the people here are as good as anybody. I would say the other side of it is like, as a product leader, I always want the vision to be 2 years sooner. I always want to see that scaled impact as fast as possible. But I don't think that's really a criticism of our people and our ecosystem, and more of the humbling experience that it is when you start digging into a big, hairy problem, like how much more complex it always looks than on the surface. So it's like very easy to go talk about a super app vision. It's really hard to build an open source framework and community and sustaining businesses that do it.
I think you've nailed it. And if you've been following me, sometimes I lose my patience and have a crack at people, mostly on Telegram because I'm always sleep deprived. Sometimes I go very public on some topics. And I think you've touched on something which is really interesting. Pagoda has world-class talent. I'd say that the foundation in the Marik era has been actually really good with hiring. As far as I can tell, we've got world-class talent, business development. We're getting top-down great deals. And then the question is, how can we have the same approach for recruiting world-class talent at the grassroots level?
So important. It's
where
really,
do the
really
best
important.
developers live? Where do the people with the most ambitious idea live? Where are the people that tried and failed in other ecosystems because they were constrained by those ecosystems? And that's where I lose my shit with the community. I'm like, the NDC cannot be this black hole that absorbs everything. We cannot be the bureaucracy blockchain.
No.
Like, we cannot pull in the few builders that we have and distract them from actually building. So yeah, I know that it is not your job or even Pagoda's job to build the community side of things, but if you have anything to say on that, I think it would be appreciated.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good question. And for us to really succeed at our mission, we have to figure that question out. I think the hardest part is how. And I think what's really difficult is if you look at this, like there isn't exactly a template for how to do this. Like we can get inspiration from a few places. So like Bitcoin community is purposely like in on, and even the early days of Bitcoin, if you looked at it, was like a very small group of people. If you think about the great schism of the block space wars, right? It was a small group of people that were discussing that. People forget that it was maybe like a 50 people in that room. And there were like big industry titans that we all know that were happened to be there, but it was a small group. And then ETH has done like a pretty good job of creating this ecosystem. But the problem is that I honestly believe that so much of ETH's coherence as a community is really actually just based on DeFi at the end of the day. Like I think 50 to 60% of the reason why people are there are because there's just like a really healthy economy that works well in DeFi. But you can't just recreate that in Near. Like you can't just take those two things and copy and paste it. And we have to figure out our own approach, so to speak. Sorry, you were about to say something.
No, I think you're right. But if you double click, I think the Ethereum has a few more things to it. One is time.
Totally.
7+ years to fuck around, 8 years now. So if you take into account that time frame and what they've actually built, you have enough time to go to conferences, get drunk, build on top of each other. Like we've never really had any breakthroughs. DeFi is only possible if your base currency, it's now $2,000, because now you've got people holding onto a lot of like magic money and they're able to leverage. If you have protocols that have themselves tokens with real revenue, like I was looking at Rev Finance, the only tokens with volume are Near, stablecoins, Meta recently, the stable pools are moving a lot of money, like Linear, NearX, and ST Near. And most other protocols, including ones that I think are pretty successful now, like Spin Finance, they're delaying the token launches. So it's Ref is not going to grow unless we get more volume. We're not going to get more volume unless we get more tokens.
Chicken in the egg.
TVL is not going to go up. Like
Yeah.
we're not really capturing the real value, quote unquote, of the ecosystem because these tokens are just not launching. Even things like most successful things, Keepom, no token, probably for the best in that case because it doesn't pollute from the vision. Near social or however you want to call it, no token. Most NFTs that we're minting are all, let's call them social NFTs. Like they're not art, they're not being sold. Like
Sure.
we're creating different kind of experiences. So yeah, we need to somehow own the narrative of the builder's blockchain for mass adoption.
So to
And
your
that's
point,
why,
oh, sorry, go.
no, I just going to say that, and that's why I get really frustrated when all the focus is on the NDC. I get it's important, I'm involved. No one in Web3 is going to come because of governance unless they want to steal money. We need to find a way to either have multiple competing narratives and then cannibalizing each other. And if we have to choose, builders come first. Let 30 people do the governance. No one gives a fuck about that. Where do we have 3,000 builders? We've got 8,000 people on your social. Like those are the troops that we need to rally. Like these 30 need to unlock and enable the power for all these 3,000. And every day that we're not talking about builders is this very real technical debt that we continue to accrue. So yeah.
Yeah. Apologies for jumping in. You just got me excited because I share a lot of your observations. Look, there's two components, in my opinion, when it comes to community. So the first is exactly what you're saying. It's like, I would rather take 8 to 10,000 hyper passionate people who are actively contributing into an ecosystem than just have 100,000 profiles any day. Because with a group like that, and if you really think about this on a pound for pound basis versus our true competition, which is, let's say, centralized services, let's say AWS. If you have 8 to 10,000 people who are self-starting, economically thinking, collaborating, you actually have the workforce capacity of a medium to large company. Like with something like we don't think enough about, like we say, oh, 8 to 10,000 people, that's not enough people. Actually, like that puts you pound to pound against any Fortune 100 company potentially in technology.
I'm on the community side. I can tell you 8 to 10,000 right now. It's an army. Like we take over the world.
But that's what I'm saying. This number doesn't like, I think we're on the same page. Like that number on the surface doesn't seem like a lot of people if you're saying Web3 is a household item. But if we think it from what is the first step that we need to get to even be able to achieve our vision of this open web, of decentralizing the attention layer, at the user layer that you described, we need that army. And I think we've been like, hey, build this technology, put in some people into the ecosystem, and then magic will appear. We'll get 1 billion people here. As opposed to, we now have a technological edge that still needs improvement. Like we asked me the first question, but it needs a lot of improvement. How do we then use that edge to go recruit an army that puts us on the same pound for pound playing field of a Fortune 100 tech company? And then we have the right to get to a billion users.
And that framework is something that gives you an edge over the Web 2 model. That not only do you
100%.
have the same manpower, but you have people that are motivated or ideally aligned, like principles based. Like I remember, I think his name is Jake from the Cosmos Ecosystems DAO, coolest guy in the world. Out of Denver on a panel for Near Day, he said, I have, or I can get Google engineers contributing to these projects for free because they want to get that sense of belonging because the project is cool. They've got culture. Matt Lockyer has culture.
For sure.
We have never really had much of that going on here. Or we've had these like moments where we're trying to define what we are. That's why I try to remind people that we need to find that true core. We are a builder's blockchain. I like that the town halls recently, they're giving a lot of visibility to partnerships and projects building. But if we were to drill down on the point of how do we recruit this army?
Yeah, let's do that.
I have some views, always. Two things. First is we've got a catch-22.
Yeah.
Catch-22 are dangerous when people in the catch-22 don't realize that they're in the catch-22. So I think that the foundation is doing, or whatever, institutions on Near are doing a great job of pushing the technology. And they're assuming that there are people on the community side able to take it and run with it. And the community side may have been a little bit more passive or not really knowing what to do or waiting for someone's cue. And because they see progress on someone pushing here, they're not doing the follow-on effects. So to give you an example, after many months of nomading around the world, I'm back in Australia, and as frustrated as I get, and I'm often up to 2 a.m. in the morning fighting idiots and bureaucracy and NDC stuff, I'm like, I just want to hunker down in my island. I have a meeting tomorrow. I want to have a product lab. I want to have a team of savages where I can just tell everyone, fuck you. This is what we're building. Every time that I go away and do my thing, I earn respect because people can see your contribution and people can see value.
Yeah.
Every time you come down to people's talking points, you get ignored, you lose respect, you're wasting time. So how can we, balance the two? So that would be in the catch-22. Yeah. The second bit was related. I think the foundation is killing it at conferences. If Denver Consensus, ETC, Korea in general, NearPack coming up. So yeah, I'd like to get your insights on what the reception has been like at those in-person conferences. Do we have any data around interest, conversion, and maybe how can we replicate that or once again empower the community to do more of those things, maybe at a smaller scale, but more around the world? I'm thinking meetups, hackathons with universities, etc.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of great thoughts to drill in there. So taking from like the broadest framework level first, I think what we have to do is embrace that near.org is something very potentially powerful for us. And like I don't know if you're aware, it's actually owned in a community trust. It's not owned by Pagoda or foundation. I don't know if enough people know this, but it's true. And so Pagoda is like a steward. And if you've been seeing even on some of these recent announcements, Nearweek did their own component that is one of the primary page components now. You go there, you go to news. That's designed, built by Nearweek, with Pagoda engineering and product being like an advisor to it with our expertise. And so if I think we could take more of near.org and make it a reflection of the community values that we want it to be, that we can have something that takes the best of Web 2, I would say like product business practices, and applies it to our Web 3 ethos. And those Web 2 business practices are super high focus on things like conversion to account. Like when somebody comes to near.org, like how easy is it to get started and find your tribe? And there are benchmarks for this. Like 5% conversion rate of qualified traffic is considered like a killer experience in Web 2. In Web 3, like people are lucky to get like sub like 0.1%. Right now, like near.org is converting between about 1.5 to 2.5%, which means by Web 3 standards, like we're amazing. By Web 2 standards, you take like Twitter or Facebook or something as a comp, we're doing like, okay, like, how do we get to excellent there? So when people want to come to us, it's super easy. And then how do we make sure that the environment they come into is this community built environment where they get the values inherently by using the product? That's how we take all of this pockets of energy and focus it towards something that can get a compound effect to that 8 to 10,000 people, in my opinion.
100%. And I think that when I chose Near as an ecosystem to double down back in the day, very early days, it was that Web 2 product focus. I think that to this day, maybe, definitely Aptos and Sui are the only ecosystems that also have that laser focus on product and like building
Bunch
for
of
a specific use
ex-Meta
case.
people there, really good product people.
Yeah. But this is going to be probably a demoralizing question, but that's okay.
No, I mean,
Because we gotta
honest questions are the most important one. So.
we gotta deal with reality so we can improve. On your ETH Denver, whatever, on one of the many talks that you've had, and
Sure.
I've noticed some of these presentations have also been given by Ilya in different settings. I think that you nailed down the value proposition. And honestly, even after dealing with a lot of drama very recently on the governance side, watching these presentations are what make you go, yeah, let's do it. If you were to single out some of the key points and ask people in the ecosystem today, how many do you think actually know about it or get it? Full stack JavaScript development.
Yeah.
Fast or,
Yeah.
The meta transactions that are free on near.org, the remote login with email recovery, social recovery. Honestly, I think that most people that have been in the ecosystem for a long time, it's crazy that being a borderline near maxi sometimes is a disadvantage because they just don't take the time to keep up with the latest technical things. Do you have any sort of data or KPIs on how these concepts are being introduced in the community, adopted by applications?
It's a good question. There's two things that are difficult there. Those technologies you gave examples of, really, to most people, even near maxis like you're saying, they're just words because they don't mean anything in themselves. They're technical approaches to doing something that hopefully makes an application easier to use or more intuitive. And the hard reality is that until that's applied into products people have lasting value for, it means nothing to most people, even technical people. They need to see it be real. And then the second part, which we need to keep improving, which Pagoda, Ilya and I have had some open talks about, we need to keep improving on, and it's a focus area for us for the next few months. It's open sourcing these things. Like FastAuth SDK, we did a insane prototype. There's like 3 or 4 new technologies that come together to make that real. It's still not open source. The reason why it's not is like there are major things that we still need to iron out from that prototype. That SDK is still not available. We're trying to get it available by September. So it's this combination of two things, right? Where I need to see it in a use case that resonates with me, and I need to be able to look under the hood to see how it works. And Where we, I think, just continue to need to have relentless improvement on as Pagoda, just being open about how we need to get better, is showing that use case very clearly and showing the code that anybody can use from it very quickly. And that needs to happen faster, follow than the marketing announcements have been. Simply put.
Marketing people, dirty.
No, I mean, it's
I'm on the
so,
marketing side.
yeah, I was about to say.
It's me. I'm sorry.
No,
Okay, but when you say lasting products, do you think there's a step in between? Can we have small, silly apps purely for the purposes of experimentation and especially getting the technology in people's hands? Like, I'm thinking Metabiddle, whatever, 2, 3, whichever was the last one, the categories of the prompts were very broad, which in some ways are good because people can just bring their ideas and build. But I do wonder whether they were broad enough where from the outside looking in without any prior context, there weren't any pointers. Like, for instance, I am tempted to go to a university here and build me an application, anything, end-to-end JavaScript. You don't even have to say it's Web3. There's going to be a JavaScript hackathon. How many JavaScript developers in this university? Come and build me something, have some nice prices, have some teams. They could build something really silly and basic. It doesn't have to leave past the hackathon. But I believe my hypothesis going in would be once young, ambitious talent realize that by using a language that they understand, they can build end-to-end Web3, it's game over. Like, why would you ever go and try to understand how Solana works? Why would you do Solidity that gets you halfway through with a ton of limitations?
Form.
And this is a putting technology in people's hands that I'm referring to, even faster.
Yeah.
To any hackathon and build an application, almost like a mock-up, and go and sign people up. Like, literally, all the requirement, in the same way that we're doing a very low bar, easy requirement of deploying on Boss, we can have the same for Fastauth. Just get people hands-on experience, just like I'm doing now with the HTML, CSS, and I can change a hex and see it on the screen.
Yeah.
We need to get to that magic moment of, holy shit, it's an SDK. I don't know how long it takes to incorporate, but I'm assuming it's not that long. And then I can onboard any users on a bus stop or whatever, on a pool hall, and now they're in. So I think that those are the things that we really need to keep drilling.
Oh, I'm with you. I think the form of what we need to get to, no debate from me on that. I think the question is just like, how do we get there? And it's a messy path. It's case examples of what's hard about this is like, we do a lot of hackathons on the existing Boss component system. Going back to one of your earlier questions, right? I need to be able to extend my own libraries in order to do that, right? But still maintain these trustless, decentralized components that have a security model that means like I can embed a component anywhere and it's not going to infect the rest of my JavaScript. We have to re-architect the virtual machine. So what we're calling VM2 is like the technical project we're working on. So what we get stuck in this chicken and the egg with is like, we do these grassroots movements, exactly what you're saying, like go build a full stack JavaScript application. Builders go to it. Some builders are super creative and they figure out ways to make it work, but like 80-90% of it run into the same limitations. And we got to get it to a better spot to be able to take this group of, let's say, about 160 or so component developers that are in here today and grow it to 500. That's the set of improvements. And then there's going to be a new set of improvements doing all the go-to-market activities you just described that like we're going to need to get it to like 1,000. And I think what I've been trying to do on some of these town halls, and again, Ilya and I have been talking about how to make this even better, is give a better sense of what are the orders of magnitude that we need to get to and what are the requirements that we're hearing from the community. Some of our expertise, we think, will be these each steps to get there. And I think if we do a better job of communicating that out, then more people like yourself and other hyper passionate community members know like what places to jump in. And that's where we need to grow to by the end of the year. Put simply, in my opinion, like we don't figure this out by the end of the year, we have bigger problems. And I think product people are usually like scared to say things like that because they want to be able to run in some sort of like strategic ambiguity. But I think if you really believe in what we're trying to do here, you need to be realistic about the fact that we have an insight with a competitive advantage. And now it's time to open up the community and guide where we can make this competitive advantage grow in these kind of concentric, consistent rings. And if we don't do that, then we don't get escape velocity. I know these are all like $2 words, but it's important to think about this like in terms of product maturity curve. We don't get escape velocity. And if there's another downturn, then it's going to really hurt the ecosystem again. And so I sometimes personally wish that we would have more open conversations like this about what are we really facing as an ecosystem and like what opportunity that we have. It doesn't have to be like doom and gloom. I just think we need to just be honest about what it takes to get to the vision of what we want to get to.
I'd love if we could touch on a couple of things. The first one would be maybe if we could put it in the context of what we can build today and what can be built in VM2 to, get a better understanding of the current limitations and the future ones. And the second one, which I think is the most important one, and probably the reason why some of these conversations are not very open, or we try to keep a tight leash on them, is if we could think of ways where we could turn these limitations into positives. We basically put out a challenge to developers like, hey, if you want to build something, this is what we can do right now. This is a vision of what we can do in the future. Stick around or bring your friends. But most importantly, how can they contribute towards that progress? Like, I'm sure that there's people out there that could jump in. I think you mentioned concentric something rings. That's definitely a $10 word.
Yeah, it's just about knowing the maturity of where the product's at and how many people can like realistically contribute at what time. It's not to say we're like being exclusionary. It's more about like maximizing what is a good experience for the people who are in the ecosystem at that time.
Trust me, I know. I've seen those Telegram groups. Once you get more than 25 people, it's just absolute mayhem. Awesome. Can we put into those some pragmatic examples of what can be built with what we have right now with the limitations? And then what VM2 will look like, or some of the key differences. You can probably reference the super apps example and how which blocks should we focus on now and how we take over the world.
Sounds good. Yeah. So let's be like very tangible about today, what could be done. That's like a major need, I think, for the ecosystem. And let's like define right now. So there are about 4,000 or so consistently active community members / superfans on near.org and near. Right? And how do we get that group from 4,000 active people to like 8,000? Going back to our analogy of if we have an army of 8 to 10,000 active community members, we could do anything. Like, so I think one of the big things that Pagoda is putting some design research into and some product thinking in, but we definitely need collaboration within like the broader developer community is groups. Right now, if you go to near.org, you sign up, you land on this feed that is full of activity and life. But if I'm actually new to Near, I don't know what to do with that. Like I might peruse it. I might click on somebody's profile. I might open up a component, and that's cool. You're exploring. Like we want people to explore, but really, I think we want to be a little more thoughtful about helping people find their tribe, helping new people self-identify as, hey, I love Near, but I'm new to Near. Where is a group that I can talk to with social profiles that are based in Near to talk to other new people? And maybe there's a few community experts who love to just be a tour guide, so to speak, or a Sherpa. Then there are developers who are like, hey, I heard about this thing. I think it's cool. I want to hack my like first component. Where did the newbie developers go? And then there's the, hey, I'm a hardcore founder or hardcore developer. How do I make my way more elegantly to DevHub or to Horizon? How do we have this notion of your onboarding being similar to Reddit, like finding that sub-thread that like speaks to you to find your initial tribe that like gets you excited to be here and contributing in some way. And we don't have a really good groups feature that helps facilitate that. That can be built in VM one today. Like those are all social components that already exist. Like if you take the feed and decompress like the comment system there, you take a profile, kind of fork that, you could fork a few different components and create a group's experience. And then what Pagoda can do is help with some of the design language and the research and how to integrate it into the universal search system and the onboarding system to make it a high converting, delightful experience to get there. That's something we could do today.
I think if I recall from one of the town halls, and I may have actually met him, there is a product manager within Pagoda specifically for Near Social.
Yeah, his name's Gotham and he used to work Twitter. Yeah.
That's awesome.
We took him from Twitter. So he has amazing insight into an easy way to get people into like content they might be interested in. But he needs community. Like he's already been working with Nearweek. He loves open source. We're really lucky to have him. But like he wants to find somebody else to partner with on this.
It's funny. I almost butchered his name as well, but you saved me just in time. And what is the process at the moment? Twofold. If a user wanted to customize their own near.org experience, MySpace style, that's possible. And what would be the process for changing the default, like the macro default, in the same way that it's been done for Nearweek?
Yeah, I think there's two questions there. So the first is like, how can I have my own? I think if you're saying specifically MySpace, like my own profile experience where I can customize that. And I think you can get into the profile component today and you can fork it and change it and save it to your default settings. You should be able to do that. It's a little complicated and we can follow up with some more specific directions on how to do that. But I think there is a question around, and this is something that like being very open and honest, we've struggled with from a design perspective, which is like, how much of it is it forkable and customizable for any developer versus any super fan? And there are trade-offs with that. Any developer can go do this today, what I just described. If you learn how to read the component system, you can do that. But a super fan needs to do it in a drag and drop interface. And then there are like certain design restrictions that like we need to think about when you start saying, hey, like I can add components and does that render well in a small mobile environment versus a web environment? Going back to this usability core value why we're here. When you start allowing that level of customization for those who haven't totally learned the power tools, so to speak, like you can lead to some broken experiences. So
it could go horribly wrong.
It could go horribly wrong. And it's not to say that we don't want people to do it. Like it is available. It's open source, but we haven't really nailed the level of customization that we're recommending. That said, it is available.
I think that maybe the MySpace example was not the best one because at the core of MySpace was with that basic structure of the page. The analogy that I always give, I was very young at the time, but my sister had older friends and you could change music. So when people would visit your profile, it would just stop blasting the most horrible music.
Yeah.
And some of them were emo, the goths at the time. And he was like,
My Chemical Romance, Rise Against, AFI.
Everything.
Yeah.
The profile is like bleeding and crying. And
yeah.
That is probably less of the customization that I'm interested in. But for instance, I just went to near.org and I'm logged into one of my accounts.
Yeah.
And I can still see the Minsta widget with some photos on the right. And I can't see Nearweek. And there's things like sometimes I go to Near Social because I've got the retweet feature on the Near Social timeline. And I'm wondering, like, when will the retweet one be included on the other gateway? So
retweet it's available now if you go to near.org.
Maybe I'm running on an old version.
Maybe you might be cached or something. We should look into that. Can you send me a screenshot? That'd be great.
Yeah, of course. I'll send it. I'll take it now and I'll send it when we finish.
No worries.
Those would be the sort of things that I would be looking at for setting the right culture, so to speak. Like, for instance, do we want a social media or do we want a place where hackers gather and talk about ideas? DevHub, I think, maybe some people want to make Dev Hub the default. They just don't want to see a timeline at all.
Yeah. Good feedback. Yeah, I think so. There's kind of two
Or I guess,
questions there.
yep.
There's first is what is like the long-term goal of near.org? And I think where we're trying to get to, so that super app analogy you were describing. So this is like your second question, going back to that. Like today, the place for hackers mostly, I would argue, is GitHub. GitHub is where you see, and I believe this, like for those that like develop a lot, like you communicate more through your code than you do through your social comments.
Interesting.
That's
Yeah, I can
which
see
is
that.
which is like an insight, right? It's not to say that you're not going to make social comments and do things, like you are, but the way in which like I really believe developers are communicating is through their code. And like it says a lot more to me when you fork my repository and do something and then try to submit a PR back. Like that says a lot more to me about what you think about my project than, hey, this is cool.
Interesting.
Because you're putting your energy into making it better, potentially.
Or maybe they think it's shit and they're
Or
like,
maybe
I'm
they
gonna make
think
it
it's
better.
shit. Yeah, exactly. But the cool thing about developers is that whether you're a positive collaborator or like a competitive collaborator, it still makes the product and the code better. It still makes it better. And I think like what we haven't done well in near.org is to say, like, how do we take that mentality of communicating through code as well as allowing community superfans to get involved? Because one of the things that people don't know about is there's 75 million people on it or so. There's not 75 million developers in the world. There's maybe 25, which means 50 million people have accounts, and there's probably duplicate accounts. So it's probably less than 50 million, but like a ton of people who have accounts are there to just like witness what's going on and learn.
That is a very generous take because I'm definitely in the 75 million non-developer. I think that we started with a humble aim to develop and then we fell flat along the way. But yeah, it's
But
definitely
you were
learning.
trying to learn. You were there to learn, but you wanted to witness like cool code being built or products being built, right? And so how do we take that energy, make that alive and well in near.org in a specialized manner, but then bring in two key components that I think have to be there that are core Web3 ethos. One, some sort of level of community governance, and two, a monetization system. Like what makes a super app, if we go back to a super app, it's the intersection of social, commerce. Those two things are what make a super app. The third piece for, I think, like a Web3 super app is social commerce and community ownership. If we can get those three things working together in the context building Web3 experiences, and more specifically, let's say front ends, which most people need, if whether you're in Polygon or Ethereum or Bitcoin, you need a decentralized front end for any different reasons, then I think we do start to capture that energy that you just described.
There's definitely two camps on this
Sure.
one. And as I get older, I can see very clearly which one I'm on. It is perhaps more clearly apparent on the Bitcoin and Ethereum communities. Bitcoin is very libertarian, like the sovereign cell, like the lack of consensus between community members. It's almost like a feature. Yeah, we don't want groupthink. Like we should
Okay.
never agree on doing something because then we have to agree on something and then we have to. You always want to keep the humans out of the equation. This is the raw code and it does one thing and that's it.
Yeah.
Ethereum definitely introduces much more of the human collaboration aspect and definitely a wider range of like political spectrum. I am personally against groupthink. I've seen enough bike shedding in my lifetime that I know that if a person lacks the leadership or the vision or the ability to execute, they tend to drag people in with them. It's not their failure. And it's sad because they tend to drag in people with them that could have actually executed or that actually had leadership. So I'm actually more in the camp of fork it or like healthy competition. People that are doing things in a certain way should be open to others joining them. So you can have like larger cohorts all working towards the same vision. But I feel like the train needs to have been built and there needs to be tracks for the train for people to jump on.
Sure.
So yeah, and I think that's the bipolar relationship that I have with governance in Near, because I'm like, yeah, it's great, but if there's no one actually leading, it's just a bunch of clueless people shouting at each other.
I hear you, right? So I was VP of product at Kraken, which has some of the original Bitcoin OGs and leadership there. I supported them directly. Like I'm very aware Bitcoin culture. Dan Held is like a friend of mine. I would say that their culture is a reflection of what they sought to make change in the world, and how they choose to govern is a reflection of that as well. And Ethereum is in a similar camp, right? You might argue Ethereum is trying to like unlock new forms of creativity through applications, like with this global computer. That was like the original Ethereum vision, right? It's this global computer sort of thing. There's been like a lot of things where people have commandeered that into different value systems, which is why, as you're saying, this is actually a pretty diverse group from libertarian all the way to the communist scale, if you will. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a reflection of values. For us in Near, like if we really want to be the builder's chain, then, and this is like my personal opinion, not any official stance of Pagoda or Foundation. This is purely Alex Chiocchi's personal opinion right now.
Putting full hat on.
Yeah. I personally think that we have to subscribe to the religion of what makes things easier for people. If it makes things easier for people and opens up the web, right, it eliminates middlemen, then that's probably the right thing to do. Now, making things easier for people can also mean that you need to have work groups of maybe 20, 30 people who are making decisions that are auditable, right, for core product experiences, like a group of a community. It's not 10,000 people giving design input. It's 20 top contributors, design and product thinkers. That's like much more of a like command and control sort of mentality, like you were just describing. But on the other side of that, like you have honest feedback loops from every person in the community, and there are transparent ways for that information to get aggregated and brought back to groups of 20 to 30 people to help make design decisions that are easier. Then you have a healthy alignment of needs. But the danger comes in is who are those 20 to 30 people? And I'm not like, I couldn't tell you who those people should be today.
But I guess the question is, what is the product? Because I can tell you from OGs, maybe not as active these days, or at least not in the public life. At times, I don't remember the specific context, but it did come up. Actually, it may have been about the distribution of Near and how concentrated it is. And there was a bit of validators revolt. It was that camp. And they told me the chances of Near getting forked over the next 5 years and there being whatever, a new Near, exactly the same functionality, but they just find a new tokenomics, is not zero. Like it's a possibility. Not. So that would be the highest level of abstraction. They've got some gigabrains. They built something amazing. If builders like what they see, they come and build here. If they don't like it, they can go to Solana or they can fork it. And I feel like that applies at every level of the stack. Oh. When you say, hey, Alex, you and I, let's start a Tamagotchi super app. You and I are co-founders and we bring in the smallest possible team to build our Tamagotchi app. If we do it right, we get users don't give a fuck how we design it. They get an experience, they get value. If we don't do it right, it dies quietly. And maybe if there are contributors and they don't like it, they can fork. And then there's 2 Tamagotchi apps. And hopefully over those iterations, one wins. So this is the sort of evolution that sometimes I don't understand why people are very pushy about groupthink. It has to be one way and one way only. And I have to drag in everyone with me. And by the way, we've already had this evolution and it's been beautiful. Satori evolved into KeyPalm and now they're both doing their own thing. And yeah.
I think what you're saying is compatible with what I just said earlier, but it depends on where you make the distinction. So let's say the core near experiences that we just talked about, right? There's this consortium of people that can make fast decisions. That's an open source library. That's an open source experience. So if somebody wants to fork it and say, yeah, I see what you guys are doing there. Just like think of vanilla Android. There's a group of people who are constantly contributing to vanilla Android or Linux. And there's a lot of smart people that look at that and say, you know what? Actually, I'm going to fork that and I'm going to go build a robotics version of Android that's way better for interacting with the physical world, which is the most common form actually in which like a robotics stack usually starts. Is somebody forks Android because it's really easy to run. I think in a good open source project, you look at that and you don't say that's a bug, you say that's a feature. But those people who come up with different ideas for how to apply this open source operating system still have expectations of whatever they forked to be getting better, and they can choose to take improvements or not. And if they don't want to, they don't have to. It's their project. But if it doesn't get better at the core, what will actually happen is somebody will come out with a closed source version of Robotics OS that does solve their problems. And the unfortunate fact of the matter is if you have a company, like you have a profit motive and you have to find a sustaining business model, if that allows them to get to a sustainable business model faster, they'll go use the closed source version. Like I was an entrepreneur, like you get to a point where your runway runs so thin and you've got like a ton of pressure from your investors that like, you got to figure out what way to perform, and how you get there starts to not matter because you're going to die. So like what we have to do is communicate out what these improvements are and not force people to take them unless they want to. And we're already seeing this play out. Look at Near Social versus Near.org, completely different mirror. And everybody who's making their own gateways, like Nearpad, completely different mirror of a gateway of Near.org, very developer focused. I think the developer experience on Nearpad is awesome. Like the tutorial there was easy enough that a product person can understand it. That's me. If you look at Near Social, it's a much cooler, like hacker environment, like more memification.
I don't, but also shout out to Shard Dog Social. If you haven't checked it out, they're doing amazing things like playing with embedding videos and like a ton of stuff, like moving super fast.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what you're saying links to a question that I was saving for the end, but we might as well just bring it out now.
Go for it.
At what point is Pagoda going to introduce costs for the different products and services? Quote unquote, the new indexer APIs look cool, but I know a cost is eventually coming. And yeah, maybe if you could speak about the broader spectrum of products, or even fast auth, is that going to be monetized? Or
for all the products, there's the philosophy follows two things. Like everything will be open source. So if you want to build it and run it yourself on your own stack, your own AWS clusters, your own personal machine, you always can do it. But if you want to use a managed service that has SLAs, expectations of support, probably a higher level of abstraction and easier to use, you don't have to go set up all your own boxes, there will be cost associated with it because it actually costs quite a bit to run it. Now, what Ilya and I are talking a lot about down the line is like, how do we make sure that those costs are actually aligned with the net of the Near ecosystem? So the goal is not for this group within Pagoda to stack a bunch of revenue out of the ecosystem to just hold in a treasury and make personal profit on. The goal would be it's charged in some form or capacity that then gets put into some sort of financial mechanism that brings value back to the ecosystem. And we're a little early to say exactly what that is, but I can tell you, I can give you a hint that like the way you may be charged after a free tier, by the way, we're always going to let people try a free tier, is maybe something around staking. You might have just some like staking requirements to continue to use it. And that's a good thing for Near, right? That actually helps with decentralization. That helps keep money in the economy. And it keeps all of our needs aligned towards common good. So that's a form of payment though. And we do need to be comfortable with that because these things do have cost.
Would it be a staking requirement, but the user still keeps the staking rewards, or the staking rewards goes towards Pagoda?
No, it would be likely. And again, this isn't finalized. I need the safe harbor clause here. it will likely be that you stake and that you delegate your stake and you like may pay for your cost of service through staking rewards itself, or you can do a direct pay. We'll have to figure that out. But I think the important thing is that like we really want to make sure we double click on, if you want to run it yourself, you don't have to do that. But it does cost money to have high performing SLAs and support and managed services that have upgrades. Whatever money will get charged there, we want it to be aligned with ecosystem good. That's something that's core to what Ilya and I have been talking about.
Can you think of Web 2? I know that they exist. Can you think of Web 2 examples that have a similar model? It's free and open source to self-host, but then you can also pay and you just get the out-of-the-box experience. I think WordPress.
WordPress is a great example. I think another good one is like RudderStack on analytics, I think does this as well. There's like an open source SDK that you can use, but then if you like want extra data analytics services, to some extent, Discourse. There's a few, but I think the difference is even between Web 2 and this is like the money that's being charged. We want to figure out how to put the value back into ecosystem as well.
That's my second question.
Yeah.
Does Pagoda have any outside investors?
We've never formally raised money to my understanding. I think our funding comes, from my understanding, mostly from foundation, like many of us. And there is not, like, the cap table doesn't have any VCs or anybody like that on it. I shouldn't say the cap table because there's some sensitivities there, but I could tell you there's not like outside VCs and stuff on it. So.
It's like Putin and shit.
No, nothing like that. And no one, I know you're kidding, but it is important because in order, there is an important ballast that happens because of that. Like I told you about the pressure of having outside investors as a former entrepreneur. There is some intentionality behind that.
100%. And that's precisely what I was asking. And I think that you can also look like the layer beyond that. It's important to separate the foundation as a not-for-profit with a mission for growth from an actual engineering company,
an R&D company,
products, and being sustainable. So yeah, it makes sense for the funding relationship to exist that way, and it's also good that the engineering vehicle, it's not constrained by outside interests, at least in the form of external capital.
Yeah, it's hard. Like this goes back to you're asking me about like how are we going to win as near, like what I just described there, and I did do a tokenomics workshop with Ilya and some like really smart economist people at EC. We were just like brainstorming, and the simple thing I could tell you is that we can't just do what ETH did or what Bitcoin did. Like those are successful models. They're breakout successes in their own right, but we cannot do the same thing. The type of product and technology we're building is different. Do they rhyme and have inspiration from those other two things? Yes. But we have to figure out how to do value alignment in a tighter economy than they did for this whole taking over the attention layer to work. And there's like a lot of really cool thinking that we've been exploring around like, how do we help apps bring the most attention to Web3? Whether you're bringing attention to Ethereum or Bitcoin or anybody, how do we actually help them get pass through money for being a great, consistent, secure attention source to those protocols? And this is like how we disrupt the traditional advertisement model of Google and Meta, who basically control the attention economy right now. If you're not playing by Google's and Meta's rules, like you're not getting attention to your app or website, period. And there is a way to actually to break this. You asked me about long-term vision. Like there's a way for us to look at that. If you want to see a hint of my opinions, a year ago, I wrote a blog on my website, alexchiocchi.com, about like why I think Sweat is one of the most innovative consumer products I've seen. There's some hints into how it is possible to use Boss plus new tokenomics to disrupt.
I was going to go to your website to read your blog, but I ended up on Steve Aoki's website, and I was just like banging.
Yeah. Common mistake, common thing that happens.
Yeah, no, I did watch a lot of the YouTube videos, but I missed that one. I'm super intrigued. that may be an example of some of the conversations that I've had with Ilya. My mind always expands. The art of what's possible definitely kicks in. And sometimes I see that gap on some of the things that are being implemented in the ecosystem or even being actively pushed by things like the NDC. One of the things that he mentioned that are similar, but maybe at an individual level, not on an app level, would be, say there is a community treasury, or like a smaller pot of money, and then people are able to like give kudos. So say hypothetically this podcast goes out and everyone's like, oh my God, what a fantastic piece of content. They could give kudos to you and or me for whatever period of time.
Sure.
And then that near in the pot of gold gets stripped to the people that hold kudos. And he was saying that it could even be a very interesting way to almost be able to hire someone in a decentralized way. Engineers, open source contributors, it definitely fills that void of there's people creating real value, but they're not formally employed by anyone. I thought it was brilliant. I know that NDC V1, V2, whatever comes next, is working on a form of reputation.
Yeah.
And once we have that, it'd be possible to implement. I also love the idea of, again, creating that builder culture is elevating those builders and acknowledging the value that they create, not just for their apps, because some things are very hard to monetize, but for the ecosystem. I remember early days Stacks had an app mining program.
Yeah.
I think it worked. I'd have to double click to see what the issues were there, but I personally loved it. I really liked, and by the way, there was an app there that I actually started using every day. It was a journaling app. I've been trying to convince developers on here to create a journaling app because what would be easier than getting people to come back every day and journal? But yeah.
So I'm with you. I think there's a few things that are like interesting topics to digest there. So like on the point about organization through like you might call like almost more of like a mercenary style or gig style program. Like I actually believe that's the way that work is going. If I'll give you an analogy here. So I live in Los Angeles. Hollywood is actually a very mature creative industry at this point. The first drum of Hollywood was 100 years ago. And if you look at the way modern output products, and their products are like movies and TV shows, which actually follow a very similar arc of software. Like you got to do a lot of user research. There's a lot of technical challenges like 3D design, and doing on-set production is like all really complex technical challenges. And the way it works now is you have a few studios, like 6 or 7 of them, that money, and then they hire production companies and independent directors who then put together strike force teams to actually go make a movie or a TV show. Then these people come together and they like go build it, and then they go their separate ways to different projects. There's not like hundreds of thousands of people who are just on staff like making movies. Software is actually starting to do is follow a similar arc, where right now like hundreds of thousands of people are mostly in like giant Web2 tech companies that are building a lot of technology, but increasingly more and more stuff is open source. Like more and more stuff is being built through gigs and through tasks. And as product gets more composable and technology gets more interoperable, which is happening through Near and Web3 in general, the ease of building a team on the fly to go build a group's product feature or go build a better developer IDE experience, like the speed of which that's being able to get done is faster. And now we actually have the economic tools with like smart contracts where we can hold things in trustless escrow to get it done. I think over the next 5 years, like software development is going to look more like this freelance model, similar to making movies, than it does necessarily today with these giant monolithic companies. I do believe that's going to happen because it allows for creative people to express more creative autonomy, take the projects that they want, and there's more economic efficiency in building that way. The trouble is there is a downside to this that we have to be very careful with, because with any innovation, there's always downside.
Can I guess what it is?
Yeah, go for it.
Job security. How do you monetize?
So job security becomes a major issue. And like, I have a lot of friends in industry here, and they're like going from project to project. And then the second one is who controls the pots of money that fund the opportunities. And this is where I do believe, as I was getting to, smart contracts can actually fix a lot of this, because the ripe abuse that happens, and you're seeing there's actually a strike right now in Hollywood of writers and actors, is there's no transparency to the funding process by these studio executives. They just play you against each other. They do very dirty, I would say, borderline unethical things. But if everything is funded through a publicly auditable place, if somebody's doing it that way, there's always going to be somebody else who can attract better talent by not operating in that way. And I do believe this is where we can make it.
I grew up in Venezuela, so that's a separate set of childhood trauma. But
Fair.
I always revert back to resilience. And for me, there's some very deeply ingrained thing about there must always be an alternative. As you were saying, what came to my mind was the people willing to starve should win. If you say, hey, I got the keys to the kingdom, I decide to get who gets funded, and I say, I'm willing to do it for free, there should still be pathways for my product to reach the market, to reach the audience, and for me to be able to basically prove the funders wrong. Whether money actually flows from that source or not, at the end, it's a separate story, and how to ensure that the funding is efficient and we don't have to get to that. It's another story. But that to me is the biggest difference between having centralized sources of funding, because someone has to do it, and having open ecosystem, resilient ecosystems. Just a little side note.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you on most of it. There's one part I think I disagree a little bit. Like on those who are willing to starve should win. It reminds me of an old thing my dad used to tell me. He used to always say, work hard, but work smart. And I was like, no, Dad, work smart and work hard if you have to. I think what we should try to incentivize is, and this is just like my personal opinion, I think we should try to incentivize people to come up with creative new approaches to solving old problems. And if people come up with a new approach, there should be a transparent way for you to get money to go do that. But your willingness to starve to get there, don't get me wrong, there are points in my life where I had more debt than cash. Being a founder is really hard. But I almost don't want to celebrate the grit for the sake of grit, because I think you don't get the best creativity out of people. Yeah.
Look, we're definitely aligned. Obviously, it's very hard to catch all the nuance in one phrase. And there's something about willing to starve and winning that kind of rhymes to me. But
sure,
I think to me, it's just capturing the ethos of not letting that centralized body dictate what gets worked on and what doesn't, or even the lack of funding. It's sad to me to some extent that the bear market kills most of the innovation.
I know. It's been hard.
And once again, I don't think anyone should starve, but if you have that conviction and you're able to work smart and hard, at least you should have that pathway to innovate.
100%.
And you can probably draw some parallels in the Web2 world where you can see how that pathway gets shut down. Say, hypothetically, you're able to work without pay during COVID, but you're physically not allowed to do that last mile delivery. Yeah, I think that Web3 should always remain open so that people can do their thing, even if they're not being funded directly.
So it's funny that you say that, and not funny in the sense of I've had those exact same thoughts, and you're reminding me of 4 or 5 years ago where I was really fed up with traditional venture capital model, which is ultimate gatekeeper. If you look at the way VC mostly works, there's only 5 funds really that make all of the strategic decisions. And then most of the other funds are just doing follow-ons on their strategies, which means if you don't follow into the world that those 5 funds believe is the right thing, unless you have independent breakout success, you're not going to get anybody's attention. And what I loved about Web3 and why I started contributing early to E2 validators, very early test nets, and Solana, I helped do some early market making around independently, was that I looked at this and I was here are creative people that are trying to do something new, and they're crowdsourcing funding without a VC gatekeeper. And that's not to say they didn't bring VC money on later or at some point, but they weren't dependent on it. It was just an option. So to your point about the bear market, like unfortunately those taps have been really turned down quite a bit. But the reason why that's happened, which I actually believe is like a good thing, is like the token model was abused. And there were some really bad actors who spoiled the pool for a lot of people, which kind of goes back to like my original call to action where like crypto, open Web3, whatever you want to call our community, needs a new model. Like, we have to figure out another model besides just pure token issuance. We have to figure out a model that may use tokens in it, but takes another valuable economy and makes it open. That's not a closed economy and makes it open. And I think that's the attention economy now for us. Like, I think you look at the biggest economy outside of finance and it's everybody in online advertising and attention.
Twerking and food pics. That's where the money is these days.
Correctly. Like, yeah, think, and then auction markets for the advertisement rights for those videos.
Incredible. Alex, just a really quick parenthesis. How tight are you with time?
I do need to end at 5, if that's okay.
Okay, all good. So what we'll do is, I want to run really quickly through your experience. I just want to make sure that we have the full context of who you are as a person and the experience that you bring into the role.
Okay.
And then we're going to jump into community questions. Some
Yeah.
of these, I'm not going to say who they're from, but you can probably see that they are from the inside.
That's good. That's good.
So you mentioned that you studied at UCLA, major in philosophy.
No, I studied actually at UC Davis. I majored in philosophy, specifically analytical logic systems, which is like trying to take things like vagueness or metaphysics and convert those arguments into essentially equations that could be assessed for validity. So before you have experimental data, that's how you assess whether or not your hypothesis is like worth running experiments on, which like I try to bring to my product day to day. I didn't realize it would be helpful, but it is. And then my
That's so
second major was comparative politics. So specifically like studying political systems from around the world.
That's fascinating. So I would imagine that first major would have a strong maths component or technical component.
Yeah, it does. It starts to converge with theoretical math at a certain level. I would say like you can ask Ilya this. I'm better at the hypothesis forming side than the math side, but I know enough of the math side to read something and roughly understand what's happening.
This is where teamwork makes dream work. As long as you do the maths.
Yeah, I have enormous respect for true mathematicians. I can only pretend to read what they do.
Lucky for you, you could probably get away with it if you talk to someone that knows even less like me. Now, how does that lead to the tech world and I guess LinkedIn?
Yeah. So I thought I was going to go work for the UN. That was my goal. I really believed that like systems were like a way to promote, I would say, social good. Then I like worked for a few state governments and government agencies and nonprofits. And I just saw that the like value to incentive alignment was, let's just say, inefficient. And like you can be actually fairly impatient sometimes. So at that point I had like an existential crisis and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? So I applied to jobs, places where there are good jobs was like in banking and tech. When everybody thinks about, did not culturally fit in with banking, even though they were like, oh, you're like fairly smart. You could probably make us money. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to hate my life every day here. And then LinkedIn was like a pretty small startup at the time. And they offered me like a $10 an hour contract for 2.5 months. Yeah, like maybe you could do something versus like the banking offer I had was like quite comfortable for a recent grad. So everybody thought that I took this startup, but I really enjoyed, and like to this day, actually believe in terms of social network companies has stayed very true to its mission and vision to connect the world's professionals to make them more productive and successful. And they've been marching towards that like fairly scandal free for 15 years. And so I fell in love with that and started just doing like market analysis work for them early on.
Interesting. How long did you stay with them?
Close to 6.5 years.
Did
So
you receive stock?
I did at one point, not when I was a contractor. The first year I didn't. But the big thing more than the stock though for me is a learning culture. And so I actually applied for a leadership development program internal for like people from a business background to learn technical skills. I was like there are 2 people who were selected out of like 300 applicants. And I spent 2 years learning front-end development, like basics of data science, business analytics, product management, project management. And I built a prototype on my own that they were like, this is really cool. And some salespeople helped me get in front of some customers. And then they invited me to the product management team and I became a product manager. So I like felt very lucky to work there. Like culturally, honestly, like the fact you talked about like people who are willing to put in the effort and do something for free. That was not my job. Like I was doing it because I was passionate about it and I got recognized. I was very lucky to be able to then take on a product management leadership position because of it. And
That's amazing. Last one on LinkedIn. Did you meet Reid Hoffman?
didn't meet Reid Hoffman. Yeah.
He's probably the most quoted person on this podcast now, as I tell people the story of me being sad and depressed on a bus in Sydney on my way to a coffee to see if I could get myself a job. I was meeting the person doing legal tech at one of the top consulting companies here. And I was listening to one of the podcasts with Reid Hoffman. I think it was Grey Matter.
Yeah.
And he was explaining the difference between being a professional, you do a job, they pay you, you can go somewhere else, it's very transactional, and a vocation where you rise to the challenge of your time. It's a concept that has definitely stuck with me, especially in Web3, because there are many roles out there where I keep telling people we're not looking for an employee, we're looking for somebody to step up to the challenge. Yeah. There's no job description. We have a mission and we do whatever it takes to get there. Yeah. Moving on to Kraken, how did you make your way there? What was the interest in crypto?
Yeah. So prior to Kraken, I did an AI startup and that was 3 years, first 6 months on my own. We tried to build like hardware and software. I actually used one of Ilya's libraries when he was at Google. Didn't know him, but yeah, it's a really funny story. So talk about communicating through code. Like I knew about Ilya from his code before actually knowing him as a leader and a founder. And I felt like there was something important.
Which one is nicer, the code or the human?
They're both great. They're both great. They're just different. They're definitely different.
Because I've seen Ilya speak Russian and I've seen him speak English. And I see it with myself when I speak Spanish and when I speak English.
Same.
Language gives you a different way of expressing yourself and different personality traits come through, different interests come through. I can only imagine what his mind connecting to a machine would be like, but
there's a lot of precision in his code. I'll just say that. And I think though, to build an open source AI library is a pretty hard thing to do. But so with that though, I actually had a soft landing for the company. We ended up selling it. I was pretty upset with the whole process. Like I wanted to keep going bigger, but had a difference of opinion with a few folks. Like everybody will have good relationships, but it gets hard at the end, especially when you're running out of money. And I had a friend who's like an old Bitcoin and Ethereum person who I will not dox. So I was having
Satoshi.
Not that cool, but he's been around for a little while. And he was like, hey, like this ecosystem. And I mentioned just fell in head first. And I like, actually the book though, that solidified it for me after just like the technical interest was, believe it or not, the book Sapiens. Because like many people before you get orange pilled, it's really hard to actually shake the convention that like money in society could be decoupled. And the book Sapiens, if you haven't read it, goes through the history of that. And like you see that money was in a bunch of different forms prior to it being a green dollar. It was cowrie shells. It was gold. There were barter systems in many societies even before that. And like the fact that we have money the way it exists today is purely like a social convention of this time. And that made everything click for me, like in terms of the impact. And so then at that ethos and culture, I literally sent them like an application to like a junior product management job. And I still remember to this day, like one of the recruiters called me up and he said, you're like really overqualified for this job. And like the executives liked your resume, but are you sure this is the job you want? I was like, look, man, like I just have heard from great friends that you guys are cool. I think your product like is got good bases, but like we could do more things with it. I just wanted to have a conversation. I'm actually having a really good time in these independent communities, but I'm just exploring. We built a relationship. I started as a consultant and then the bull market hit and I was one of the only people that had product leadership experience. And they were like, hey, why don't you come run the product management team? And that was 2 years of just like a wild ride. Really amazing though. Yeah.
Amazing. And you discovered Near while you were there. What were some of the first impressions? I would imagine you were exposed to many ecosystems, and eventually, what made it click for you finally to make the jump? I would imagine, was it cold approach to Pagoda as well?
It's funny question there. So we had a token listing team at Kraken and one of the product managers ran that. And he sent me a message and he was like, have you seen this Near thing? And I looked at it, I was like, oh, here we go. Another ETH killer. Seen this before. And he's like, the people involved in it are like really amazing. Their approach is very interesting. Like their vision is not to just build a ETH killer, but like to go even further. And I was like, all right. As I read the white paper and I went through it, and I was like, wow, this is very cool. And by the way, it was not like just my decision to list it. There's like a whole committee and approval process. It's like very legally diligent and everything. So but I was a thumbs up. I was like, this is very cool. Hey, I took like a mental note of it because at the time though, things were like, I was at Kraken, things were going a million miles an hour. And I was like, I'll just keep an eye out on these guys. There's a few projects that I continue to do that. And then while I was there, actually, a recruiter sent me a message on LinkedIn being like, hey, have you ever thought about like joining a community? It was like very cryptic. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then they told me like, we're actually recruiting for Near. And I was like, oh, I remember you guys. Yeah, I'd love to have a conversation. And
This explains so much. Why are we trying to recruit people like it is a cult?
he did a good job. I won't say who the recruiter was. He's an outside agency person. And we just had conversations for a long time. And I was like not looking to go do anything else for a while. And then I got a chance to talk to Ilya and I had written my own paper about where I thought blockchains were going to go in the long term. And I shared that with him and he was like, I see the same world. And basically I came in as a consultant to Ilya to help with product guidance for the ecosystem.
We're entering the rapid fire round because I've got some fire questions from the community and we're fire here as well. Basically, the whole thing is burning down.
Yeah, let's do it.
Is that paper publicly available? And do you think that if anybody creates similar content with vision, etc., and it gets in front of the right people, would have the same opportunities?
Yeah, we can make that paper publicly available. Like I'm open to posting it. I'll talk to Ilya about it too, but I'm open to it. It's like more shorthand. It's not like a fully published thesis, but it's an idea. And so happy to share that. And in terms of opportunities for people to share their wild ideas, like, yeah, absolutely. Like I try to keep myself very available to like where people think that like Near should go and what I can do to help them with their vision. I think Ilya does too. I think at the time, like, I think Ilya was looking for a very experienced product leader to help augment him. And me going to Pagoda was more of he brought me when he decided to become CEO again. And he asked me to come with him. And then I went through an interview process, of course, and had to get like formally checked by the Pagoda team.
Always due diligence. Nothing in this podcast will be used in a lawsuit. Like it because the classic, who's the decision maker here? I feel like people can get burned down a little bit on the community side if they have a big idea or a big vision, but it's just not in front of the right people, especially just to see the potential. If somebody else dismisses it, but it's just not the right audience, I've always liked that Near is very flat and you can really get in front of people. So we'll have all your contacts in the comment section.
To that point, like if you go to near.org, you go to my profile, like my Telegram is just openly there, I think.
Oh my God, the bots must be having a blast with you.
But that's the funny thing is, yeah, it is. It's just openly there. Like, no, you'd be surprised. It's actually not. There's not too many bots yet. Now it might be like tempting fate, But I think my point is like, I definitely believe in an open door policy. And
Your personal assistant is also great. Shout out to April.
yeah, but I do filter.
Fair enough. Okay, next question. This is a good one. I've skipped a couple, but whatever. Editorial privilege. What challenges have you faced pushing for product inside an organization that is traditionally engineering focused and driven? How have you adapted, and what change have you been able to bring to the organization?
Yeah, good question. Pagoda has definitely been an engineering-led culture. I would say, it's hard. So I tell the product team this actually fairly regularly. Nobody has actually truly nailed Web3 open source product as a like strategic discipline. There is no playbook for this. All the playbooks for product management that exist right now, if you go read like Cracking the PM interview, all Web2 style product management, which does not apply directly. Web2 product management actually makes an assumption that you can hide the way things are made to actually have outsized value of perceived value versus cost of building. And in that gap is the profit margin of Pinterest, Google, Meta, et cetera. Like it is as simple as that. And so the approach that we have to take in Web3, and I look at the work that I'm doing with Pagoda as just one instance of it. There's a lot of it that has to be done across the ecosystem. Is like part of the reason I'm actually really excited to be here. It's like, it's an opportunity to rewrite the rule book, so to speak, for the discipline, to say there's a new way to think about product management. And I think the challenges are like, how do you build really tight experiences while also making like the magic, so to speak, how it's done, open source and available? Nobody has really nailed the formula for that. And if I was to say on a day-to-day basis, it's figuring out the right moments to do both. And some sort of like structured formula is what I want to arrive at some point in time. It is the biggest challenge.
But to the question, and I think that's how we open the conversation, everything goes full circle always. Other than the challenges of product practice in general in Web3, are there any specific challenges of trying to invent this new way of doing things while being embedded within an engineering entity, which I guess engineering has much understood and easier to assess practices, KPIs, etc.?
There are challenges. Like engineering is, I think when you're building services and APIs, there's a bunch of different types of product that you build. There's services and APIs, there's infrastructure, and then there are like end user experience. When we talk about product, all of those are different products. And when you're building infrastructure or services and APIs with an strong engineering organization, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. Like the engineers have very strong opinions about how they should be used because the product's meant for developers. Infrastructure is meant for another developer. An API is meant for another developer, not your average person down the street. And so what I think in those circumstances, what good PMs have to do is not try to go head to head in debating like the best syntax approach of calling the API. It's to up level to say like, where's our strategic positioning? Where is like, the way we communicate this to market in an authentic way? How do we stay organized and efficient in how we get there? And not to try to force an engineer into a long debate about that experience, complement those strong skills, recognize that they have them, and build an overall good experience.
You nailed the tension or the confusion that some of the community has with Pagoda. It seems like at some point there was a transition from core infrastructure to building end products. And some people, or there may be like a lack of focus. It may be seen to be competing with like other ecosystem players. From our conversation, it seems like a lot of these things are on the roadmap to open source. Some of the things I've heard to date is fast auth, making people choose between two options. You can't export your private keys. There's just an element there that may generate some tension.
100%. If I can comment just like directly on that, because I think it's a really important thing. Like if we just take a step back, fast auth as a product approach had not been done before, right? The idea of taking meta transactions key signing via like an open source biometric system and bringing that all together with a decentralized email recovery system. Nobody had brought that whole world together. It's like 3 simultaneous innovations that like we barely duct taped together. And like we needed to like continue to look at it and like fix some like very critical issues before like in good faith we could put an SDK out there that wouldn't just flood, frankly, like a small engineering team into like overwhelming amounts of requests for things that we know are broken. So like what we haven't done a good enough job though, what I think like the community's fair feedback is like reiterating that our intention is to make these things available. And also looking at our own internal operations well enough with good enough predictions as to like when it will happen. I can tell you now, it's going to be in September, right? It's going to happen. We're going to have an SDK.
Near APAC?
I can't commit right now if it's exactly near APAC or not. I'm sorry. But
Are you going to be there?
I will be in near APAC though, I promise.
It's a near APAC.
It's a free speech world. You're welcome to speculate, but I can't comment.
Alex, really briefly, I know you have to jump off in 1 minute and 30 seconds. This has been an amazing interview. Honestly, I think we've got another 2 hours in us. You have to come back. The last question from the community. Personal goals play a big part in an industry driven by conviction. What resume bullet points would leave you feeling accomplished and ready to move on to the next product?
Wow.
Deep.
Whoever asked this one, thank you. It's a good one. I have been thinking about my existential future fairly recently. I think if this went well, I have innovated myself out of a job and I actually can move more towards academia. So the resume bullet points would be like helped create an ecosystem with like large value. I don't know what the number is, but like large self-sustaining value that open sourced a critical part of the closed attention economy. Like that's what I would write it as. And then what I would love is like if I could continue to be an ecosystem member, watch people like take this beyond what I could imagine. And then I can like, go get my PhD in like tech ethics and come on more podcasts with you and just like talk about this is the way to like, build technology and like, look at these amazing people that innovated me out of a job.
If you're game, I would love to add to your resume bullet points a Tamagotchi app.
Yeah, yes, 100%, 100%.
We can hack on this together. Alex, thanks so much. I am extremely grateful that someone as busy as you is able to dedicate 2 hours to the podcast. I know that from our loyal listener base, they really appreciate it. And we'll definitely to have you back. Is Pagoda open to having more frequent communication channels? I'm thinking like Twitter spaces and things like this, because there's definitely a lot of things in this conversation that may not stay relevant as we continue to ship code and the ecosystem iterates. But I'm thinking of the best ways to have more ongoing updates.
First, I'm grateful to be here. And I'm actually very grateful that we have open source community journalists like yourself, like who bring like more attention to the ecosystem and knowledge. Like it's actually a very underappreciated job. And I'm sure it feels very thankless at times. And I know this because my partner is a journalist in documentary space. So I like very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. Speaking specifically about Pagoda, like I would love for you to be able to have more frequent communications with the product managers who are actually in charge of some of these direct features and applications you talked about. I think we'd be very open to that. I've actually been pushing every PM to be like more open source focused and work more with the community. And you're starting to see pockets like that with Nearweek. Actually, fast off, I'll give you a little teaser. A mobile SDK is probably going to be co-created with Sweat. So there are people who are really trying to move in this way. And so their ability to like work with more community folks like yourself and get exposure is going to only help perpetuate that. So I would love for us to have more PMs on your show.
Awesome. Definitely send them over. Alex, thanks so much.
That'd be awesome. That'd be super fun. Yeah, thank you, man. Take care. Have a good day. Bye.
That's the end of another episode. As always, I just want to thank you for listening because, let's be honest, you are amazing! And I also want to remind everyone that everything contained in this episode is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast shall be construed as financial, medical, or any other type of advice, and you should always consult with licensed professionals before making any financial decisions. Make sure that you like and subscribe so that you stay up to date with the latest episode. We've got a steamy hot pipeline of guests that will keep you entertained right through the bear market. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon. Bye.